Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Runners Roundtable. I was going to say run to the finish, but that's not what it is. But that lets you know who I am speaking to. And I am speaking to Amanda Brooks of Run to the Finish. And this season is all about inspiring female runners and women who are changing the running industry in their own way, who are changing not only the face of running, but also how we interact with running. And you and your Instagram account have been very pivotal for me over the years as I've cycled through figuring out who I am as a runner and what it means to be a runner. And the social media landscape can make it really, really confusing, and it can sometimes be a huge distraction from what is best for me, right? There was definitely, I had a period of time where I was just trying to keep up with everyone else and training in ways that weren't particularly helpful for me. And your account is just, it's this place where information is presented, but it's never presented in a way where it's like, you have to do this in order to progress or get faster or any of that. On the flip side, I think it's more of a here's information, kind of do what you want with it. And here's the research that supports all of that. So, Amanda, can you introduce yourself to us and let us know how you even got started with running?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like you said, I'm Amanda Brooks. I actually started Run to the Finish way back in like 2007 as a blog. So, some of you will not even remember the way they existed back then. So, about 2012, I actually became a coach. This became my full time job. So, writing about running, coaching running, researching running. That is what I have done for almost 12 years now. And I love it. I've been a runner for almost 22 years now, which is crazy to think about. And a lot of that has really helped inform the way I speak about running. Like you said, one, I genuinely love it. And I go through long phases where I run a ton and never run a race, which is weird to a lot of people. But for me, that became really important because I kept my joy for running alive in that way by letting go of always needing to meet some kind of criteria or new marker or new PR or new this or that. And while those are super fun, I wanted to just keep remembering, like, gosh, when I go out for a run and I come home, I'm more creative. I can think better. I'm more clear headed. I feel better. I'm just nicer to be around. And it's easy to lose that when you're in the middle of, I've got to go get in 20 miles and okay, how much time is that going to take? So that really has informed a lot of the way that I talk about running. It's not that serious. Most of us are not like elites. This isn't our full-time job to train. And so I think it's just constantly sort of coming back to keeping that perspective of like, you're supposed to enjoy this and we can get better while enjoying it. It just doesn't have to maybe be so much pressure on ourselves all the time.
Yeah, I feel like when I started running and you're so 2012, right, is when this became 2007 is when it started as a blog. And even then I was trying to track the trajectory and I'm like, oh, 2007 was definitely an era of blogging. And I back then I used to have a recipe blog. Like that's just what everyone, I feel like everyone had some kind of blog. So even seeing that, okay, here's this blog to a website now. The website is full of so much information that is truly a testament to the love of running that you have, but also the researcher in you and all the information that you bring together in a way that is understandable. When I first started running, it was very much so that I had so much joy for the sport and just I was in so much awe of myself and my ability to run and to get out there. And me being a runner very much so lines up with my involvement on social media, particularly Instagram, because that's where I would go to kind of track my runs and share my runs. And I used to be that person of, if it's not on Instagram, did it even happen type of thing. And as I was there, I started to see more and more accounts, bigger accounts. I would follow accounts, and I just thought, oh, in order to be a runner, you have to run fast, whatever the heck that meant. So I spent a few years thinking that I wanted to get a Boston qualifying time. And I've talked about this before. And that made me very cranky trying to do that. I did not particularly enjoy running. Running became a chore for me. And thankfully, I snapped out of that. But I feel like I have spent the past few years trying to reclaim that joy and just the ability to go out and run. But I find that I'm able to connect to that ability to just enjoy the run because that's where I started. And I worry about people who are just coming into the sport now with all the information overload, that they think that in order to be a real runner, they have to do these races or run these paces. And I'm just curious what you think. Do you feel that way too? Or am I an overthinker here when it comes to that?
I think we all go through that phase. I mean, certainly I did my first marathon and then, I got to know a lot of other runners and people were fast. And so you start feeling like, well, the thing is, I'm supposed to progress, right? Like I have to keep getting better, or why am I doing this? And I think we all go through that until I kind of hit a point of like, I don't care. Like I'm really, really happy and I'm just really happy doing this. So what if my pace is the same right now at 42 as it was 10 years ago? I don't know. I guess that's actually pretty damn good. I'm still showing up all the time. Um, and really and truly, when a publisher reached out to me about a book, the thing that got me to actually do it was thinking about the majority of runners, which I always lovingly call the middle of the pack. And that is kind of the goal. We're all trying to figure out, how do I keep running something I enjoy in the midst of my crazy life? And could I just get a little bit better at it? I don't need to like conquer everything, but what if I keep doing this and I just keep getting a little bit better? Like, yeah, that's great.
And when you say a little bit better, what specifically are you referring to?
So it's different for everyone. For some runners, it's, well, right now I'm doing couch to 5K, but gosh, I'd really love to work up to a half marathon. For some people, it's, I want to be able to run a mile without walking, which again, I think run walk is awesome. Like you can do it at every level. And then for other people, it is starting to set like personal best and things like that. But your personal best also is good enough, even if it's never a Boston qualifier, even if you don't even choose to run a marathon, like it's good enough. And I think that's what becomes important, is just remembering like there is no specific benchmark. There's nothing you have to hit. So what goals make you feel good, and just celebrating your own progress all the time. I get excited every time I go for a run, which sounds insane after 22 years, but I can run 3 miles, I can run 20 miles every time I come home, and I'm like, wow, you did that. I mean, running is not easy. Like it becomes routine, but it is never just easy to go run.
Yeah, and I mean, every time you go run, you are a bit of a different person, right? The Depending on the time of day you run, depending on the shoes you wear, the clothes you wear. I feel like yesterday, I'm in Miami, Florida, and yesterday we had 60-degree day. And I was out, I described myself as like a dog on a walk, where I'm just like so excited, my tongue's out because that run, it felt so beautiful. And then there's some runs that don't. And I find that it's because of that. I don't know who I'm going to be when I'm running. I don't know what's going to happen in my mind when I'm running. And that really is something that I think at least for me, when there isn't a race on the schedule, or there's really no like end date specific goal to the training, it there is I guess I give myself more of an opportunity to just be in the run and to just enjoy the fact that I can run, that I have the ability to run. Um, so you had the blog, then a website, and now it's so much more than that, right? It started off as you, and now you have an entire team of people with you. And when you started the blog and you started sharing this information, what was the purpose behind that?
Yeah, I think one, I wanted to put my journalism degree to use. It was not being used in my corporate job. And so I was excited to write. And really, that is still my passion. I still say the website is my business. Instagram is like a nice bonus community. Um, I also have always sort of liked education, I guess. Like, I like learning, I like teaching, and I am very much someone who wants actionable information. So I cannot stand it when I go to a presentation and it's like 30 minutes of like concepts, and I'm like, just tell me how to do the thing. And so that is kind of a lot of what you see on my Instagram is like, well, if this is the thing you want to do, like, here's some actionable things you could try. Um, Also, I am not your one-on-one coach. I am not your PT, but here are some things you can try. So I think that's a lot of it for me. I kind of decided that was the path I was going to go down. Like everyone who started a blog in 2007, it started out very, very personal. Um, and I just evolved away from that over time as I realized, one, it was not that interesting to me to read about someone else and what they ate every day. So I was like, who cares what I ate? No one cares. I don't care. And so I thought, what's actually useful to people? So that was kind of step one. And then I hit a point with coaching where I just realized I couldn't take on athletes and give them the quality level of coaching that I wanted. So that's why I started adding coaches to my team. So yeah, there's 12 coaches now. And I'm very, very picky. I've had a lot of people reach out, and it's not that they're bad coaches. I just don't know them. I don't know their philosophy, and that's super important to me. It's very important to me how we treat people that are parting with their money. Like, it's a big deal to decide to pay for a coach, and especially because we reach those people who I call the middle of the pack or the back of the pack, and have often thought like, oh, I'm not fast enough to have a coach. That's something I hear a lot, and it's just not true. Like, there's so much that a coach can provide. And so to me, it's just really important that they get a really good experience from it. Um, so it's been fun and an unexpected piece kind of this journey to see that grow.
Yeah. And it's all women.
It is all women, which isn't entirely intentional. It kind of was at first. Now they just happen to have been the people that have continued to connect and be a good fit. I have spoken with other male running coaches. Some were already with a team, or some were just too new, so they weren't a good fit for how much time I have available to help a coach. So yeah.
Okay. So again, it's you, and now it's a team, but there's also this, from what you just said, right? A mentorship element that you take on. And I mean, when you started writing these blog posts and when you decided, okay, it's too personal, let me kind of apply this to everyone. Did you ever envision that you would be here right now?
No, I mean, I thought I will write articles and that will be kind of what this whole business is. I got certified largely to get more information and to ensure that I was providing better, accurate information. So I wasn't even thinking like I am going to coach a lot of people when I first took that step, even.
Yeah, it's so interesting to see for me, it's just the trajectory of, and I put it with like my timeline of, oh, 2012 is when I started running. And there's And even when you said 22 years, I'm like, oh, your relationship with running is old enough to go buy alcohol if it wanted to go buy alcohol. Like that is an adult runner right there inside of an adult runner, which is just, it's so great because you've been in this space for a while and you're making your mark in it. And you're definitely, I read a lot of your stuff, particularly on Instagram, where on the one hand, I'm grateful that you're doing it. And then on the other hand, I'm like jealous that I couldn't take advantage of it earlier, right? Like and it kind of goes back to that social media thing that I had mentioned earlier of newer runners perhaps thinking that it is all about time and paces. And I know I've had people reach out to me and it still shocks me, even though it shouldn't, when people assign their worth as runners to their paces, or they apologize for being so quote unquote slow. And it's one of those things where I'm like, oh, that's still kind of in the atmosphere and it's still kind of in the ether of running. So I'm curious to hear, in your opinion, what has changed within the running industry since you were a baby runner back in 2002 to your 22-year-old runner in 2023.
Yeah, I mean, the amount of information I think at this point is actually overwhelming. I had no information. I maybe bought like a magazine here and there because I was a cheap college kid who didn't even want to pay for a subscription. So, like, I think I was like 4 years into running before I got a subscription to Runner's World. And that was kind of the mecca of everything running at that time. There weren't a ton of competing magazines, even. And certainly like the online world was in no way, shape, or form what it is. So I really feel like now there's a lot of analysis paralysis. So you like, okay, what is the best training plan? And you start Googling and you download 10 different things, and then they're all a little bit different. And then you're not sure which one is right. And I know because then you email me and you ask all kinds of questions like, but can I lift on this day? What if I want to lift on this day? And I'm like, you are overcomplicating it. When can you lift? Go get it done. So I just think there's so much that it's overwhelming, honestly, at times. And you're trying to figure out, okay, well, now everyone is also talking about mobility. Oh my God, well, where do I put that in the schedule? I'm just barely getting my runs done. So I think it's just start where you are, celebrate everything you're doing because that will keep you showing up. But yeah, I actually think the information overload is the biggest thing. I will say the other change that I've appreciated is more runners talking about their easy pace. So I stopped sharing watch photos a long time ago because I was like, the focus is not on pace around here. And
Mm.
I have enjoyed sharing it now when I share it sort of in the context of like, hey, on my easy days, I'm keeping my heart rate at like 130. And here's what that looks like for me, like versus a heart rate of 160 on race day. But other runners coming out and saying, listen, like my easy day is like a 12-minute. And then, they run like a, 3.5 hour, whatever marathon or something. And you're like, oh, okay, there's a really big gap of time between their easy pace and their race pace. And I think that is helpful just to see that, like, yeah, your easy pace needs to be different than your race pace. And maybe your easy pace is 15 minutes because your race pace is 12 minutes. Cool. Like you're doing it right.
Yeah, I remember when I first started running, it was similar. There really wasn't too much information. I mean, I still have some of my, like the articles that I would clip from Runner's World and plans that I would cut out. Because even though some things were free, you still had to either have the subscription, an online subscription to it. And I feel like a lot of the plans at the time were very much so you have to run at the pace that you want to race at. Or it would kind of describe go run for 30 minutes, but it didn't really, it was like easy. And I'm like, but what does easy mean? Right. And easy is such a For me, it's easy, slow, fast. Those are all such relative terms because it can change. It can change from day to day. But I remember seeing all that stuff and trying to piece it together and trying to figure, wait, how does this work? And for me, I reached a point where I didn't want to think about it anymore. And I hired a running coach, but there was that period of time where I thought, but I'm just a regular runner. And what am I going to do with a run coach? And it's for me, it really has been transformative to have a running coach because that person's able to take a more global view of training than I am. Listen, I'm sure you've had it where I have one bad run and I'm like, this sucks. Why am I doing this? And then, once I zoom out and see everything else where it's like, oh, it's one bad run to 10 either great or okay runs. I need to stop. So when it comes to the run coaching bit, what's something that you wish everyone could know about run coaching?
So I think the biggest thing is that a good coach, it's truly customized to you. I think there is sometimes still the impression that even like, oh, we've got 12 coaches, so we must have some general plans. And then we kind of move them around for different people. No, it is your coach actually gets to know you as a human, how things work for you, what gets you excited. Like, oh, you really hate running on the track. Okay, let's not do track workouts. Like, let's do speed some other way. Or on Wednesdays, you only have 20 minutes total for anything. Like, okay, so how do we put a schedule together that actually works with your life? And I think that sometimes sort of surprises people that they're like, we work with a lot of nurses now, so they have swing shifts or different shifts. And that's an immediate concern for them is like, is that going to be okay? And I'm like, yep, you just tell your coach in advance, like, these are my 12-hour days. And so we figure out how does the schedule work around that, because that is the goal. It needs to work with your life rather than you constantly being stressed out because on the paper it says, well, I've got to run on Wednesdays, even though Wednesdays are like your longest possible work day. I think it fascinates me when people reach out, they want coaching, but they're still really nervous about those pieces of it. And I'm like, no, it's designed for you.
I appreciate you mentioning that because I find that that's sometimes the hardest thing for people to understand, that whatever run coaching is being provided for them to them, it is customized to them. So, at least for me, when I think of, oh, I'm getting something custom, then the price kind of makes sense of different coaching options, right? There's so much that goes into it. And I just really appreciate you bringing that up because it's not coaching. If you're working one-on-one coaching, because I know there's different coaches who offer different tiers. Like there's people who do sell the plan and here's the plan, this is what you get. But when you are working one-on-one, that, in my opinion, should be the goal for all coaches, that you're creating a plan that fits the person's lifestyle and that it makes sense for them. And it's so interesting. I'm just thinking of people reaching out to y'all and thinking that there's like this library of plans that you all just pluck for the people. And that's really not what it is. But I think it's also because, again, from when I started running to now, run coaches were only for elite athletes. And even then, the training plans were so secretive. I felt like I never knew what anybody was doing. And that's like what you shared about people sharing their slower paces. That's something I actually enjoy now, of seeing elite athletes share what some of their workouts are, because if I see someone that they're like, oh, 400 at the Oval Office, 400 meters at the Oval Office, I'm like, wait, that's so cool. Like I've done that before. Like that's where maybe you're different pace than I am, but it's cool to know that we are doing the same work, or that there are certain principles that can be attributed to all runners, and it's not just to elite runners. Do you find that I guess, what are some of the common questions that you get when it comes to the run coaching aspect of run to the finish?
I think some of the common questions are like, do I need to run X number of days? Like, so are your plans 5 days of running? And I always say, how many days are you currently running? Like, how many days do you want to run? What is the goal we're going after? So for some people, yeah, maybe they do run 5 or 6 days. Some people, maybe they run 4. Maybe right now you should only be running 1 day. Like, we got to figure that out. We generally follow the 80-20 principle. So I get asked about that a lot. Not for everyone though. Also, there may be phases where you're 100% running easy because we're trying to create a routine or build back or just be smart about things. Or you may peak at 90-10, where 10% of your week is really hard. And we plan strength training too. I think that's another thing that has vastly changed. No one spoke about strength training when I was starting. I did nothing ever. Like, I don't even remember it being in the magazines. And for me now, it's just a non-negotiable. Our athletes have to strength train. And again, it looks very different. Some of them are super comfortable in a gym and they really enjoy it. Others are like, I don't want to do this. And so I'm like, okay, how can we sneak 10 minutes in of stuff that I know is going to keep you from getting injured until I can get you to the point where maybe you like it enough that we can sneak in a little bit more.
And I think you're touching upon something that's so incredibly important that people may not realize. There is quite a bit of negotiation and creativity involved in working with other people, right? You're thinking of, if you're thinking, can I get you to do 10 minutes? And then hopefully that person gets comfortable with the 10 minutes and then maybe you can push it to 5. Or maybe you can start off with body weight, get comfortable with body weight, and then encourage them to, hey, let's pick up, a 5-pound weight and just see how you feel. And I find that particularly with runners, and I'm going to throw myself in here. When I first started running, all I did was running and yoga. Those were the only 2 things I did. I didn't want to do anything else because I was so afraid that if I did something else, I would get injured. I was afraid that if I had a friend, and remember I had a friend who she loved to go to spinning, and she would always tell me, let's go to spinning, let's go, let's go. And I would tell her, nope, I don't want to go to spinning because I don't want to do that and then be too sore to run. And now I'm like, wait, spinning, every now and then it's good. It's a nice form of cardio. I'm not pounding my joints. There is a place for it if that's something that I want to include. So I'm curious, when you get people who come to you and they say, oh, but I don't want to be sore from my runs, or I don't want to do this because I'm afraid I'm going to get injured. How do you start to break down some of the preconceived notions people have about doing more than running in order to be strong runners?
I think the two sort of run is, haven't we all been there? Man, I played that game for a long time too with strength training. Oh, I'll be too sore. I'll do upper body, but I won't do lower body. So one, I always feel like, listen, I've probably said everything they've said. Like, I've been at this a long time, so that helps. I'm not coming from a place of like, I can't understand. I usually say a couple of things. One is, any trainer can make you sore. Our goal is not really to make you sore, it's to help you find progress. So if the training session that we put in there initially has you so sore that you can't do your next workout, we've done something wrong. So if you're a little sore, you should still be able to go do your run, and it'll probably kind of work out even in that first mile or so. But if you're so sore that you're like, it hurts to walk, like, that was wrong. We messed up. That's not okay. So that, I think a lot of times though, people will go and start a new strength training program or go to a class at the gym, and that is the result because they go do an hour of something that they haven't done at all before. And so then they're afraid to do it. So that's where, like you said, we start with, well, what are you currently doing? Like, that's our starting point, not, oh, you should be doing this, but what are you currently doing? And then the next piece I always kind of look at, we have so many of our athletes now that are women in their 40s and 50s and even 60s that we're coaching. And it is a little bit of a different mindset. So many of us grew up in this cardio focused world where calories were everything. And so changing that discussion with them to listen, your metabolism is dropping because you're losing muscle. It just naturally happens, basically starting at age 30. And if we don't do anything about that, everyone who's complaining about perimenopause and menopause weight gain, a lot of that is actually just your body is shifting because we didn't do anything about the muscle loss. And so if we can help maintain some of that, you're just going to feel better. Your runs are still going to feel better. You're not going to be injured. You're telling me you want to do this for a long time. So let's actually set you up to do this for a long time, not just to like kind of sort of get through a few months of running. And it's not a quick mindset shift. Like, you know, my mom still is sort of like, lift weights. I don't know about that. Like, it's not something women did. And so that's fine. But we just keep kind of having that conversation and that slow build up. And I've loved seeing that a lot of them were like, no, I know this is something I need to do. I just don't know how to start.
And I think that's the hardest part, because I'm even thinking back to piggyback on what you said about a lot of women grew up on the idea of toning, right? We're only going to lift enough to tone the muscles, but if you lift too heavy, you're going to get bulky. And I've had people tell me that, and I'm like, do you understand that in order to get, quote unquote bulky, there's a whole nutritional piece that goes with it. It's not just you're going to lift the weight and you're going to get like, that's not how it works. But it also goes to show you the lack of information that's out there for women in specific. And there was a story, because I find your stories, so I feel like your static posts are information, and then the stories is where there's just a little more humor, a little it's a different vibe in the stories for me when I watch it.
Yeah.
And you're like, yeah. And I don't know when this was, but you were talking about how you cut your hair and how you had chopped it all off because of the hormonal changes. And I was enthralled by that, because here was someone talking about it, talking about how our bodies change, and how something as simple as hair, and that's, I'm 39, I'm going to be 40 next year. And I'd say over the last year, 2 years, oh, the hair. That was the first thing that it was. My hair is thinner, and it feels different now. Like, it doesn't feel. I have two daughters, and they're 13 and 11, and I'll go up to them and I will pet their hair. And I will pet their hair and I'll say, like, I remember when my hair was like this. Now it's not. But you talked about your hair and you're like, I chopped it all off when all of this was happening. And for me, it really was, again, enthralled, but also I just so appreciated that you were talking about that, because I can honestly count on my hand how many runners, female runners that I know, that talk openly about it. And for me, I felt myself seen, and which is why I say, like, I love your content, because I do feel myself seen in all of it. It's not only am I learning, but again, the way the information is presented is, here's this information. This is what you can do. I think it's that. This is what you can do. It's not, this is what you should do, even though that's kind of what it is. But then there's also the bits of you that we get as well. And was that an intentional choice on your part to be like, you know what, let's talk about this stage of life that a lot of women go through, and that we can kind of mitigate the challenges by doing something like strength training, by doing something like changing what we do as athletes? Because I mean, I remember when I first started running, I didn't have to warm up at all. I could just go out the door and run. And now if I do that, I feel like a tin man. and everything hurts if I don't warm up properly.
Yeah, I think so. Kind of what you're talking about is I went through some major hormonal issues like around age 29, and that lasted for a good 5 years for me. And I had no resources. I had no idea that I was literally experiencing menopause. Didn't have a doctor who would explain anything. There were no fantastic Stacy Sims books with adaptogens. I just didn't know what was happening, and it was awful. And I had to sort of figure things out on my own because I wanted to keep running and not feeling awful. And so here I am again, and I'm like, well, now my hormones are normal, but I'm going to get to do all of that all over again. And 50% of the population is going through this. So why are we not talking about it? And especially as runners, because we're so in tune with our bodies that I feel like when we start coaching people and they're like, I don't understand like why these runs are feeling so awful. It's the same thing that I've been doing for years. And it's like, well, because your body's doing some different stuff right now. And so we're going to have to kind of work with it differently. And that was sort of the shift for me of like, how can we stop fighting with our body and figure out how can we work with it where it's at right now and know that like, okay, if I kind of am willing to shift what I'm doing a little bit, then I can keep getting maybe the results that I want and keep doing things. But that's hard when we've been doing things a certain way a really long time. It's hard to change. And so I think having more information and more discussions about it makes it easier to change because there's an understanding of why do I need to do it differently? Why do I need rest? I never used to take a rest day and that kind of stuff.
Speaking of rest, how do you, I don't want to say convince people to take rest, but how do you frame rest to runners? Because that is something that the grind mentality really does seep into everything. And if I just have trouble sometimes telling people, slow down, like it's okay to pull back. The people I work with, the athletes I have, it's always like, I'm like, it's okay to rest. And I'm going to encourage you to rest more rather than less. Like if you're telling me, oh, I'm feeling sniffly, I'm like, okay, cool, let's rest. Like, let's do something else. So how do you frame that, or how do you bring rest up? Because now that I'm saying all this out loud, I'm like, wait, I think rest, it should be there, like with strength work of, if you're not willing to rest, like you're not willing to strength work, then we've got to figure something else, because those are two things that are incredibly important.
Yeah, I think usually, I mean, like you've said, every athlete's a little different on what's going to be like the thing that will tip them over. But I kind of go back to like, well, let's even just look at the science. What happens while you're running is that you're physically breaking your body down. What happens while you're strength training, you're actually creating tears in the muscle. So training itself is the breakdown, and all of that is intentional. So at some point, that means your performance starts to decline, totally intentional. But then we take rest. And during rest is where your body now catches up to all of the work that you've been doing. And then we get what we call super compensation, which is a slingshot effect. And so, yep. So rest kind of comes in that, what are we doing every week to take care of our body, but then also having those cutback weeks that are designed into the training plan. And cutback weeks are a novel idea for a lot of us too. But so once you kind of start looking at like, okay, how is this going to improve my performance? That often really helps. And the other thing I start sort of looking at is, okay, you've told me you've got a time goal, but we're struggling in your speed workouts to get there. What do you think would happen if your legs weren't so fatigued by the time we got to that workout because you took your actual rest day where it's planned in your calendar? And so sometimes it's just getting people to lean in and be willing to try it for a little bit and see the difference. I honestly think a lot of people come to running from a weight loss goal. And so that becomes part of the other problem, honestly, is there is a big fear of missing any day where they are burning calories. And I understand that. Again, I grew up in a world where we talked about counting calories all the time. And so, it's kind of working on that mindset shift too of, okay, well, we're looking at how we can build you the strongest body, and the strongest body can do all these workouts and put in all these miles, but only if it gets enough nutrition and gets good recovery.
I love that only if, right? Like that only if. And I know I try to think of not, I don't like to say the word balance because I think balance is really hard to do, but harmony, right? How can we bring harmony into the different elements of who you are as an athlete, of the rest, the strength, the running, the life, the work, the family, like all of that kind of comes together. And I find that this time of year, I find to be so fascinating. So we're recording at the end of December, and there's so many mixed messages online right now about we've got to rush, got to get the gifts, got to do this, but then we have to rest. And I'm like, I don't understand what you want me to do. Am I supposed to keep up with everybody? Am I supposed to like do this highlight of my year? Am I supposed to rest? Am I supposed to take a nap? I don't understand what I'm supposed to do, and I'm just trying to figure it out. But that probably then goes back to what you said earlier of like this analysis paralysis of really understanding what are we supposed to do when the world is busy, but then we also still need to take care of ourselves. It's not, I think that's probably a question that everyone struggles with in answering and figuring out for themselves.
Yeah, and I think that's where it's important to just allow yourself to have seasons of life that are different, like your training may look a little different at certain points. And I say this all the time, but like peak fitness is not meant to be year round. It's not year round for elite athletes. It's not even year round for the bodybuilders that you look at. Like it's called peak for a reason. Like there's been a really strong buildup to it. And so it's okay to have seasons to your training. And yeah, holidays may be the time where it has to take a back seat compared to other things. Or, for me, it might be the time where I want to put in some extra long runs. But, you've got to figure out, what genuinely is like best for you.
Yeah, and be okay with that. And I think that's probably one of the hardest things I feel for a lot of runners is being able to have that flexibility, and to what you shared earlier of being okay with there not being a big goal race on the schedule, of just running for the joy of running, for the sake of running, or running. I think the older I've become as a runner, just the more years I've ran, the more I actually look forward to those periods of time when nothing is planned, when there is no race, because the especially when we're talking about something like a marathon, right? Like a marathon takes up a lot of chunk of time, and it requires a lot of resources from the runner. It requires the hours, the nutrition, the hydration, the making sure you're well for your long run, and all this other stuff that when there isn't anything on the schedule, at least for me, I can breathe a little bit differently of, okay, you don't have to, I don't have to do everything, and this is simplifying it, but I don't have to do all these things in service of this one day.
Yeah. And I think that is true of a lot of us the longer that we run. And I feel like maybe initially the races are important because they provide this sense of accountability.
Mm.
Okay, this is why I'm going for a run today. This is why I have to get up and do this. And then the longer you've been running, you just want to go for a run because it's a habit and it's part of your routine. So I do think it's something that a lot of us are able to shift into that a little bit the longer that we have been running. And so I fully understand, because people will say to me like, yeah, but if I don't have a race on the calendar, I probably won't go do my run. And I get that for them. I'm not that way. I'm just such a habitual person. I will go for a run anyways, but it makes sense. Like it's still just not fully ingrained as part of your life yet. And that takes a while, and that's okay.
Yeah. Do you, by any chance, remember your first run coaching experience?
Oh man. Probably not exactly my first, but I do remember one of my first runners because I worked with her for a long time and I got to do something really special with her. We worked with Saucony and I got to train her for her first marathon. And then we flew to Honolulu and I got to run it with her. So that was like an insanely incredible experience. And I think that's been almost 10 years. It's been a very long time since we did that. So that was very early days of coaching. And yes, so I very much remember her and I can look back at things I did for her and wish that I was coaching her now because so much of it would be so much better with the knowledge I have 12 years in.
Yeah. So with that, that was going to be my follow-up question of how have you evolved as a run coach in that time?
Yeah, so I think one, we did not strength train because 12 years ago we weren't talking about strength training. And she was older than me at the time, so it's something that would have made a massive benefit to her. I was always super diligent about the warm up and a lot of little prehab stuff. I think I even use some of the like same workouts for because they're just fun. But what else would have shifted for her? I think it's just little things that I've sort of picked up from working with like thousands of people. Little bit different things that I do around adding in strides. We didn't really do strides, or even probably forcing her to do shorter speed work. So because we were building for that first marathon, a lot of it is just you've got to focus on endurance, and that's totally fine. But as marathon runners, we get a lot of benefit out of doing some of that short, sharp, fast speed.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really, really easy to leave that out of the plan because it sounds hard. But it actually makes marathon pace feel a lot nicer once you've done that short, sharp speed. So she probably would have had more of that kind of stuff in the schedule too.
Yeah, it's for me, I find, and I get fascinated by looking at trends in running, and the thing that's on my radar now so much is the low heart rate training. And I see that information and I have people who are like, "Oh, but how do I do it?" And I'm like, "If it's going to stress you out, don't do it. Like, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it." And I try to explain to them, I'm like, when I started running, that stuff didn't exist. Like that stuff just wasn't on the radar. And my philosophy is very much so it is around joy, but it's also of you have to have fun. Because if we're going to add this to your life, it has to be fun. Not to say that it's not going to be hard because it's hard, but it has to be fun and it has to make sense. So if we're going to focus on heart rate and you're going to go crazy, especially if you're focusing on it with like your watch and might not be as accurate, it's like, I don't want you to spend that much time overthinking it. I'd rather you tune into how it feels. Like, how do you feel in your body? How does just if you go out, how does it feel? Do you feel like you're gonna die? Or do you feel like, okay, this is nice? Like let's kind of tune into those things. And I try to get people to think of it that way because especially if you're training for a race and depending on the race that you're training, you know what's going to happen during that race. Your watch is going to go bananas, and then what you think is what you think your pace is, if you're so reliant on what your watch is telling you, it's it's going to be a very challenging race, or there's going to be challenging parts of it. So with that, with the low heart rate, one of the questions I wanted to ask you is how do you figure out what content to put out? Because I find that you are so in tune with what's happening in the ether and just what's happening in conversations I'm having offline. Like I'll have a conversation and then the next day you'll post something and I'm like, oh, okay, apparently we're all kind of thinking about this. So how is that process? I guess that creative process for you, what does it look like?
Um, so some of it is having 2,000 articles on the website. Like low heart rate is something I started doing in like 2010. So I've been talking about it for a long time. And then I just happened to literally post about it for the first time on Instagram this week. So I think some of it is because I do have the website, it is a valuable source of information for me. I'm able to see what are people searching for, what's bringing people from Google to the website. And, you know, I'm getting 1 million people there every month. So I get a lot of information about what is currently on people's minds. Other is kind of just knowing like seasonal trends and where we're at and what's coming up. What do people have to start thinking about? Like, oh my God, spring races. Yes, they're actually going to be happening and it's not that far away if you actually count the weeks down. I have a very large content calendar that is planned well in advance because it's the only way I can manage the volume of articles, Instagram, YouTube, emails, everything, Facebook, like that's going out. So I think that's a big piece of it too, is just I've been doing it a long time. So there's a lot of pre-planning.
Yeah, there's a structure you have in place that works. Okay, I'm gonna have some like rapid-ish fire questions for you. All right, what's your favorite thing about being a runner?
Ooh. Favorite thing. I mean, honestly, it's just like an excuse for time away from my phone and my computer and to think about whatever I want to think about. And no one can interrupt it.
Yeah, I would say that's probably one of the things I love the most too, of that time is non-negotiable and everyone in my life knows it. Like my family knows it. Like she's on a run. We don't message her. So I love that. What's your favorite thing about being a run coach?
It is so fun to just be part of someone's journey, honestly. Like, whether they have a great race or a bad race, it doesn't matter. Like, the things that you see them learn along the way, it's just really, it is really rewarding. I appreciate the notes I get all the time.
Yeah, it is. What's your favorite thing about Run to the Finish?
Um, I mean, gosh, how lucky am I, honestly, that like my whole job is to talk about running. Like I turned my passion into my job. So the fact that that's what I get to talk about and think about every day is pretty amazing.
What words of advice or suggestion would you have? And the people who listen to this podcast are predominantly women. So, for a woman out there who's listening and is wanting to get into running, but doesn't think she's a real runner, what words would you have for her?
I think step one is honestly like go for a walk, which sounds ridiculous, but it's just like start the ball rolling, start the movement, and don't be afraid to just say, I'm just going to run to that mailbox and like, I'm just going to see how that feels. And okay, well, that wasn't too bad. Maybe I'll run to the next mailbox. Like, mind games are literally what gets all of us through learning how to run a mile, like, and then it's what gets us through 15 miles. Like, you just play little games with yourself, and that's very normal and like honestly the best way to do it.
I personally I count my steps when I'm running, and I was doing a race a few weeks ago, and one of my friends was on the course. We were on different parts of the course. He said, "Hi, Stephanie," and I kind of looked at him. I honestly I don't remember, but he texted me afterwards and he was like, "You looked really serious," or something to that effect. And I responded, I'm like, I was very focused on counting my steps. Like that's what I needed to do in order to just keep moving forward. I wasn't even thinking about how much distance I have. It was very much 1, 2, 3, 4. I count to 100 for each leg. So I that suggestion just makes me so happy because we all do have that thing that we do. to keep us moving forward, right? That we all have that. All right, if there is a woman that is listening to this and she's on the fence about pursuing run coaching, what words of advice would you have for her?
Yeah. So in terms of getting a coach for herself
Well, how about let's do both? How
or
about
becoming a
coach
coach?
for herself and becoming a coach herself?
Yeah. So I think in terms of becoming a coach, like I got this question the other day, like, when am I ready? And whenever you want, go get your certification, like go learn all the things you can learn. And for me, the big thing I honestly want to say after that is certification is step one. Then go read every running book you can get your hands on. The only reason I'm a better coach is not because of the certification. It's because I read literally hundreds and hundreds of books. Like I read everything that comes out. You don't have to do that. You don't have to be the expert. Like this is my job, but keep reading, keep learning, like find those top people and keep expanding your knowledge. Like you'll be surprised what you even apply to yourself. And then start volunteering to create plans for friends, like do it for free for a while so that you just get used to how do I even put this together for someone who is not me? I think that's step one. For someone who's considering getting a coach, I think once you've decided, like, gosh, it would be really great to have someone else to do the thinking for me so I don't have to figure out, well, how do I change this or how do I shift this? I'm not sure how to integrate strength training or what that looks like. And you're willing to change. So I will run into that occasionally. You've been doing something one way forever and that's how you just want to keep doing it, then it's not a great time to get a coach. But if you're like, no, I really am open to learning more and I want to do this differently so things can be better, it doesn't matter what your pace is. Like that's the time to reach out.
Yeah, this one's a little bit broader of a question, but words of advice for business women, as you are one yourself.
Yeah, I think one, treat yourself like a business. So it's not a hobby, it's not your side gig. Treat yourself like a business. Like when you send emails, write them professionally, do nothing without a contract, download a free contract template off the internet. Don't agree to do stuff for free. I mean, honestly, even at the size I am, the brands that will still reach out and be like, will you write an article about this and post on Instagram 5 times for this $40 product? I'm like, even when I was a tenth of the size, the answer was no, because you're asking me to create marketing materials for you. You would never go to any advertising company and say, will you create this marketing material for free? So treat yourself like a business. You don't work for free. And then just own it. Like, okay, this is my business. Like I said, contracts, send things on like, letterhead, whatever you need to do to make sure it just feels like you're presenting. I am a business. I acted bigger than I was from day one. And that is the only reason that I became bigger. Like I just immediately, and I was lucky I came from 10 years of a very large business experience. And I just rolled that over and was like, okay, this is how we're going to try this. But it immediately gets them to treat you differently.
To piggyback off of that, when it comes to rates that women are considering charging, what nuggets, because I know, and I've been there, where I would severely undervalue myself just to get the business. And then if I asked for more, I felt so guilty about it.
Yeah, so even as of this year, I didn't realize how much I was undercharging for certain like brand work. I feel very good about my coaching stuff because I wanted it at that price point. There are two things. I had consistently increased what I was asking for, just at a smaller step rate than I should have been. And one of the things that I've always sort of said is, they're never just going to volunteer to pay you more. But you can always ask, what is the worst that happens? They say, that's not in our budget. And you say, okay, well, what would be in your budget? And then they come back with another number, but like rarely are you gonna like give them a number and they go, go away. Like they're just gonna say like, that doesn't work for us right now. And so then you have an actual discussion about it. But yeah, no one is ever going to just give you something. Like they don't want to spend more than they have to. So unless you ask, you will never get what you want. And I apply that to pretty much everything. So often I will say that I'm probably too blunt, but it's because if I don't ask, you don't know that's what I want and I will never get it.
Yeah. You're in limbo, right? It's that saying of, if you don't ask, the answer is always no, right? Okay. In your opinion, what can you and I, as people who are already within the running community, we're runners, what can we do? And this is just, again, you and I, but also everyone who's already in running. What can we do to help the running space feel more inviting and inclusive?
Um, One of the biggest issues I still see is actually around running groups. And again, I live here in Boulder. And so it's a little bit of like a weird thing where it will be an inclusive run and then it's an easy pace where everyone's running like an 8-minute mile. And you're like, who is this inclusive for? Just the Olympians? Like, what's happening? So I think if you have the opportunity to be part of a running group, just showing up and being the person who's running a 10-minute pace, a 12-minute pace will make it comfortable for the next person who shows up and is like, oh, there is someone else here that's actually running my pace. And like, don't worry about what the 8-minute folks are doing. Just be like, okay, I'm going to start going to that because I'm going to meet more runners anyways. And I'm going to run my pace, whatever my pace is. And I'm not really worried about them. I'm going to get in my workout. That's awesome. But now you've made it a place that's more welcoming for someone else.
Yeah, I feel you. I have so many thoughts on run groups, and what they say is all paces welcome. And I really appreciate that invitation of, if you go to a run group, how about you be the one that does that quote unquote slower pace, which is not like, I'm like,
It's like not even slow.
it's not, you're moving your body. Okay. Where can we find you and connect with you more?
Yeah, so runtothefinish.com is the website. And I think I am Run to the Finish on pretty much every social platform. That's the benefit to being an OG at this. You can get your name out there first.
Yeah. Okay. What do you have coming up that we can celebrate you in?
Yeah, I mean, I
You
think
personally.
yeah, I don't have any races on the calendar, which is partially because we have a large trip planned for New Zealand, which has been in the works for many years. So we are finally going. And my focus was just sort of like, I want to feel good for that. And then I'll think about racing again once that's done.
New Zealand sounds like the trip of a lifetime, and running has been there with you for 22 years. So I think it's okay. I think that sounds great.
I mean, the trip will involve a lot of running, but it just won't have any races attached to it.
Yeah. Okay, final question is, do you have, or not do you, but what are your final words that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, I mean, I think I said it earlier, but running is just not that serious. It's, like this is something you don't have to do. We've chosen to do it. And so when you have that bad run, like don't let it ruin your day. Let it be a moment of like, well, that one sucked, but like I'll be really excited when I have a good day. Or when you have the bad race, it's okay to have all the feelings, but then moving on from it, because in the scheme of things, it was a day and you still grew so much from the training to even get to that day that it was still a win.
And that's a reframe that I hope everyone can take with them. So, Amanda, thank you so much for joining me, and for chatting with me and answering all my questions. It really is. I say this all the time, and I think I've said it already before, but anytime I get to speak to someone on the podcast, I feel so grateful that I can exist in this running space at the same time as someone like you. So thank you for existing. Thank you for doing all the work, because I can only imagine how much work it is to do everything that you're doing, and know that at the very least, there's one person, that's me, that appreciates you, how you show up in running, and how you are trying to make running from top to bottom, inside out, better for everyone. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. See you next time. Bye.